Henry Winter is in the studio with me. We've got Richard Sutcliffe, who's written the book Revered and Reviled in Leeds, alongside John Ray, who covered Leeds for over 40 years. Richard, these dossiers, which were so far ahead of their time, were appreciated by the players sometimes, but not all the time. And then they were used as a way to criticise Revie in later years.
Yeah, it's that goes back to his cautious nature that Peter was talking about. But in the early years, and particularly in Europe, it's nothing like today with the wall-to-wall television coverage. So you didn't know anything about Dynamo Dresden or wherever Leeds were playing, so they were invaluable. And also when they came out of the second division in 1964, those first 2 or 3 years, you needed to know everything about them. You know, if a player was better on his left foot, it was in the dossier. And like Peter said, if you didn't think he was doing his job, if he hadn't got his players prepared, and then if something went wrong, then it was because the player hadn't done his job properly. He hadn't let them down, sort of thing.
Because at the time, Henry, I'm right in thinking it was always tactics went as far as 2 marks 11, 5 marks 9, 3 marks 7, because it was all done on the shirt numbers.
But he would have prepared them. But I mean, it was interesting what Peter was saying about what a physical, tough, almost dirty era it was in terms of the tackles that were flying in. I mean, that cup final when Chopper Harris was having a go at Eddie Gray. I mean, it was Leeds, I think, was much sinned against as sinning in that era. But the point about Revie, and it comes over in Richard's book, is that he would have prepared them for that sort of onslaught, although I think Eddie Gray probably knew what was coming.
Well, let's ask him this as if you knew that he was listening to this conversation. Evening, Eddie Gray.
Good evening, how are you?
We're good, thanks. As Henry said, had Don prepared you to know that you were going to get launched into the air at Old Trafford in that replay?
Well, I think you knew nearly every week when you played football in those days. I mean, the game was a bit different then. I mean, I look back at some of the games, old games on the television, you see replays of them, and some of the games you'd end up playing for your side now, I think.
So when the Dirty Leeds moniker was being bandied about all the time, when you were one of the main ones that was getting clattered by the opposition, what did you think?
Well, I didn't mind it because it was how the game was played then. You expected it to happen. You knew. I mean, I knew every game I played, the first time I got the ball, if I was playing outside left, the full-back would try and, let me know it wasn't going to be easy for me. So you expected it to happen.
Were you frustrated, as I was saying to Peter, that you weren't cut loose sooner as a side?
Probably a little bit. I mean, I heard Peter talking there about, Don and his cautious nature. He was a bit like that, I think, in the early days with the players. But you got to remember, when he took over the football club, they'd never won anything, and he had to try and get players in with a bit of experience. Then he realised if it was going to be a successful club, he had to try and sign the best schoolboys, which he managed to do. And all credit to him. And just listening to Peter there, what Peter was saying about him, way ahead of his time. I mean, he said that about Martin Peters when he played. And I felt that about Don Revie. He was way ahead of his time in everything he did.
What kind of mess is the wrong word, but what kind of little empires were going on in the squad when Revie left? Because everybody was under the impression, that Johnny Giles was going to replace him, but Billy Bremner got involved?
Well, I think everybody thought Johnny was going to become the manager. Then it all changed, and Brian Clough came. There wasn't any empires. I mean, I think Billy applied for the job, and Billy was perfectly within his rights to apply for the job. He was a great manager. I mean, it was the directors that made the decision. It was nothing to do with the players. There was no empires. There was no cliques at the football club. Everybody was behind each other. I mean, if Billy would have got the job, everybody would have been very happy with that.
Richard, would it be fair to say that your book is quite anti the damned United and that period when Clough replaced Revie?
Well, anti the sort of portrayal of the characters at the time, really. That was sort of the tipping point. I've been thinking about it for a while that I'd like to do something along these lines. It was actually a chat with Eddie at Ellen Road before a game a few years ago when he'd read the book, and he says, well, how do they get away with this? With these, obviously a certain version of history was written in it. All I could think of, well, you can't libel the dead. But you look at the portrayal of Don, but not just Don, but Brian Clough as well. The portrayal there, obviously, we know towards the end what happened with his character, but there's no way he could have done what he did at Nottingham Forest if he was drinking like he's portrayed in the book. I just thought it was wrong, and that was sort of the tipping point. It's not so much against Brian Clough or what happened with Brian coming into the club. It was more the portrayal that came in the book, and also the film with Don was portrayed as this sort of dour, miserable, two-dimensional northerner, whereas the Don I'd heard about off Eddie, off Peter, off Trevor Cherry, off Alan Clark, all these people, it had nothing, it bore no resemblance whatsoever to what I was seeing on the screen.
Eddie, it's Henry. Hi. Why do you think? Hi. Why do you think Don wasn't appreciated nationally? Was it an England thing? Was it the perception of Leeds style?
Well, I think it must have been a bit of both. Something to do with maybe the England job later on. But growing up as a young boy and knowing Don, I mean, a very charismatic character. I mean, everywhere he went, he was the centre of attraction. And this, as Richard says, this dour image. I mean, it just makes his ex-players laugh. I mean, because he was full of fun. I mean, I remember as a young kid, because Don was still a young manager when I first came to the club, he used to take all the ground staff boys out at lunchtime and play five-a-side football with them, have a laugh and a joke with them, make them feel like great players. I mean, everything he did as a manager, he led the lads that played for him to do everything for him, to work hard for him. And, just the whole nature of being at the football club at the time was terrific.
And did how he treated you and a lot of all of your teammates, was that why a lot of you became managers?
Well, I think so, because we were brought up to love the game. I mean, the thing about Don is as well, Don was tremendous tactically, I mean, people think I was a winger. I was never a winger. I mean, I'd never played outside left in my life before I came to Leeds. I played midfield for the Scottish schoolboys. Peter was a centre forward or an inside forward. Norman Hunter was an inside left. And Terry Cooper was an outside left. I mean, he's seen things in players that he could use. And that's what I say about him being way ahead of his time. And Peter, touched on diet, how he trained the players, but everything he did about the game, his knowledge of the game. I think he goes back to his own playing career when he had the Revie plan, the deep line centre forward, which I think he copied off Hidegkuti, the great Hungarian centre forward. I mean, he was a great thinker in the game.
Did you find it a burden being Leeds manager, trying to live up to what he'd done?
Well, obviously, he couldn't do what Don did at the football club, and that was disappointing. I never found it difficult because I realised, an early age as a manager, that you were trying to follow somebody that was really up there with the greats. I mean, he definitely was. I mean, people talk about the Busby, who Don had a great respect for, Shankly, Clough, Alex Ferguson now, all the great managers. Don was right up there with them.
Is it right that Howard Wilkinson took away photos and memorabilia of Revie when he managed the club? And if that's right, do you think that was a mistake?
Not really. I mean, I think Howard had his own way. I think Howard looked at the situation and, Alan Clark had a go, I had a go, Billy had a go. And I think he thought he just tried to try and get away from that for a period of time. But Howard embraced it as well. I mean, Howard knew, that Don left a great legacy at the football club and a great tradition. And he built on that as well.
Who's the modern-day manager, before I let you go, who reminds you most of Don?
Well, I heard Peter saying Sir Alex Ferguson. It was Sir Alex for me. Because, you don't hear a lot of stories coming out of the football club. He looks after his players. Everything's done in-house. And Don was like that.
Eddie, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Eddie Gray, as we talk about Don Revie. John Ray and Richard Sutcliffe are in Leeds. We'll be back to them after 10. Henry Winter is in the studio with me. We've got half an hour to go as we talk about the life and times of Don Revie 50 years after he took charge of Leeds for the first time. The football results from this. Mark Chapman, you're listening to 5 Live Sport, and we're talking about Don Revie 50 years after Leeds' most successful manager took charge of the club. Henry Winter is in the studio with me. Richard Sutcliffe, who's written the book Revie, Revered and Reviled, and John Ray, who covered Leeds United for over 40 years, are both in Leeds. John, his relationship with the local media was pretty special, wasn't it?
It was, yes, indeed. That's the word, special. You've got to remember at that time there was no internet, there were no club websites, and so the only way, really, that a manager could get his message across was through the local press. Certainly on a regular basis. OK, could get it through the national media occasionally, but certainly Don used to be a real stickler for getting Leeds in the paper as often as he possibly could. He realised the value of publicity, and he was superb with us. I mean, he made sure there was a story for us every day. If there wasn't one, he'd make one up. That was just how wonderful he was with us. I mean, we travelled with the team. So we were privileged in that respect. We stayed at the same hotels, joined in the carpet bowls and all the rest of it. We still enjoyed it, despite that.
Myself and Henry are looking at each other like another era, Henry.
It was end to end, though.
You would.
It certainly was another era.
You'd kill for that access, wouldn't you? And that intimacy, I suppose, with a football club.
Yeah, I'm very sort of envious of what John sort of lived through in terms of not simply that access, but just the drama that Leeds generated in their matches, and because of the character of the individuals involved. I mean, you made the point. A few of them went on into management. There were a lot of strong individuals in that dressing room who, from a very selfish journalistic perspective, I'm sure generated fascinating copy.
Richard, in your time of putting the book together, I wonder whether you'd be able to answer James in Ealing's text, which is, how would he have dealt with the strong personalities of today, like Rooney, Tevez, Balotelli, El Hadj Diouf?
He probably wouldn't have signed them.
Right.
He was very good.
Because of the attention to detail he put into signing a player?
Absolutely. He looked into absolutely everything, and even when they come in, the 16, 17-year-old lads, he even found out which girl they were going out with. I know Peter said to me he'd be called in when he was a young teenager and says, "You're going out with that girl, get rid of her, she's not right for you." Peter Lorimer, and that's the sort of attention to detail that he did. He looked into everything, the family background, the lot, anything he missed. So he wouldn't bring in people like El Hadj Diouf or Balotelli. He just wouldn't take the risk. They'd ruin what he was trying to build. I think that would so it'd stop him doing that in the first place.
It was so superstitious as well. I mean, for somebody who, put such store by tactics and attention to detail, his superstitions were incredible. I remember. Well, there are so many, but there are a few that I remember very, very well. One was I hate to mention it, but when Leeds lost to Sunderland in 1973 at Wembley, 2 days before that game, I'd said to Don, "Do you realise, Don, that it's 21 hours since you last lost an FA Cup tie? 21 hours of football," which is incredible, really. And his face absolutely grimaced. And I've seen that look before. And he said, "Don't you ever mention something like that to me." He said, "That is tempting Providence." And then he wrapped his huge hands round a table leg, a wooden table leg. And he said, tapped me on the shoulder. He says, "It's okay now, John." He said, "I've touched wood." But it didn't work, of course, because Leeds still lost to Sunderland in the final.
John, what was that lucky blue suit that he seemed to wear sort of day in, day out? Whatever the weather.
Well, as Brian Clough loved to say, it must have stank to high heaven, after about 3 or 4 years, especially after the hot weather, the summers, the August and what have you. But yes, it's true is that he did wear his lucky blue suit. Also, on the way to the 1972 FA Cup final, I had again the good fortune to travel with them on the team coach. Don spotted a bride going to church, and he took that as a real omen, because Leeds had been bridesmaids so many times in the past.
Was she all in white?
He was convinced. He was convinced that Leeds were going to win that game against Arsenal. And thanks to Alan Clark, of course, they did.